In the tangled heart of the acacia scrubland, where the sun beats down with a merciless, hammering fist, life and death are partners in an ancient, brutal dance. It was here that they found him, a creature that was more phantom than flesh, a whisper of what he was meant to be. He was a leopard, but the word felt too grand, too majestic for the shivering, skeletal ruin caught in the rusted jaws of a poacher's snare. The wire had bitten deep into his right foreleg, a ring of raw, infected flesh that spoke of days, perhaps weeks, of a frantic, pain-maddened struggle. His coat, a canvas that should have been a masterpiece of rosettes and gold, was matted with blood, dirt, and the sticky residue of his own fear. He was a ghost draped over a frame of bones, and his eyes, those luminous green orbs that should have held the untamed fire of the wild, held only a universe of terror and a hatred so profound it was almost a physical force. The rescue team, hardened men who had seen the worst cruelties the world could inflict upon its creatures, approached with a grim and heavy silence. They knew this script. The animal was too far gone. Too much trauma, too much pain. The spirit, once broken in this way, rarely mended. He reacted to their presence not with the calculated aggression of a predator, but with the explosive, desperate violence of a cornered soul. He threw his emaciated body against a snare, tearing his own flesh further, a horrifying spectacle of self-destruction. His snarls were not roars of dominance, but ragged, tearing sounds ripped from a throat raw with thirst and agony. It was a sound of pure, undiluted despair. Sedating him was a nightmare, a dangerous ballet of dart guns and desperate lunges. Even under the drug's heavy influence, his body trembled with the memory of trauma. Transporting him to the sanctuary was a somber affair. He was a package of misery, a life already discounted. At the sanctuary, the diagnosis was as bleak as they had predicted. Dr. Harris, the head veterinarian, a man whose pragmatism was born from witnessing too many hopeless cases, looked at the leopard with a sorrowful but resolute expression. The leg was a disaster, riddled with gangrene. He was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and consumed by a psychological trauma so deep it seemed to be etched into his very DNA. "We can try to save the leg," Harris had said, his voice low and clinical. "But the animal, the spirit is gone. He's a shell. All we'll have is a phantom in a cage, a vessel of fear until his heart gives out. It's a kindness to let him go." He was logged in the sanctuary's records not with a name, but with a number. Case 734. A statistic. A lost cause. He was placed in the most secure quarantine enclosure, a concrete and steel box designed to contain unbridled aggression. And for days, that is all he was. A whirlwind of snarling fury. He would launch himself at the steel bars, a flash of doomed defiance, before collapsing in a heap, his breathing a shallow, ragged rhythm of defeat. He refused food. He recoiled from water. He was a creature actively willing his own end, a final act of control in a life that had been stripped of all of it. Nobody wanted him. Not the wild that had betrayed him, not the men who saw him as a liability. He was a problem to be managed, a tragedy to be euthanized. He was a beautiful, terrible thing that the world had already decided to forget. And in the silent, echoing chamber of his own suffering, he had agreed. He was waiting for the end. He was waiting for the darkness to finally claim him. Into this desolate theater of suffering walked Elias. He was not a veterinarian, not a director, not a man of official titles. He was the sanctuary's quiet man, a presence as gentle and unassuming as the morning mist. His official job was grounds and enclosure maintenance, but his true role was something far more profound, something that could never be written in a job description. Elias possessed a stillness, a deep, resonant calm that animals seemed to understand on a primal level. He could gentle a panicked zebra with a soft murmur, soothe a traumatized chimpanzee by simply sharing the same space, his silence a balm against their invisible wounds. He moved through the sanctuary not as a keeper, but as a fellow traveler, a kindred spirit who understood the language of silence, of fear, of a pain that had no words. He had heard about Case 734. He'd heard the hushed, grim conversations, the clinical assessments of Dr. Harris, the collective sigh of resignation from the staff. He had heard no hope, too aggressive, better to be merciful. And then he saw him. He stood a long way from the quarantine enclosure, partially hidden by a cluster of broadleaf trees, and simply watched. He did not see a monster. He did not see a lost cause or a statistic. Through the bars of the cage, past the snarling teeth and the desperate, self-destructive fury, Elias saw something else. He saw a soul, drowning in an ocean of fear. He saw a profound and staggering loneliness, the loneliness of a being that has been so utterly betrayed by the world that it has turned that betrayal inward, forging it into a shield of hatred. Elias felt it not as a thought, but as a physical ache in his own chest. He felt the leopard's terror as if it were his own. Dr. Eris found him there at dusk, still standing in the same spot, his gaze fixed on the concrete box that held the raging, broken creature. "Don't waste your time, Elias," Eris said, his voice gentle but firm. It was a warning born of concern. "There's nothing in there but teeth and terror. He'll hurt you. Even looking at him is a threat. He's not one of your gentle souls." Elias didn't turn. He just nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the enclosure. "Terror is just a story," Elias murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "He's just telling the only one he knows." Eris sighed, shaking his head. He respected Elias, marveled at his gift, but this was different. This was a leopard, an apex predator hardwired for violence, now twisted by unimaginable trauma. This wasn't a case for gentle whispers. It was a case for cold, hard realism. "Stay away from the fence, Elias. That's an order, for your own safety." But Elias had already made a decision. It wasn't a choice born of logic or reason. It was an answer to a silent call, a deep, intuitive vow that he made not to the sanctuary, not to Dr. Eris, but to the shattered spirit inside that cage. He would not let this story end this way. He would not let the leopard's only tale be one of terror. He would sit with him in his darkness until the leopard himself chose to see the light. That night, as the rest of the sanctuary fell into a restless sleep, Elias pulled up an old wooden stool, placed it just outside the mandatory safety line, and began his vigil. The leopard, who the world had given up on, had found his first believer, and so began the slow, painstaking war against despair. The first day of the vigil was a symphony of violence. The leopard, who Elias had quietly named Kaido, a name meaning ocean for the vast, churning depths of his suffering, reacted to his presence with an explosion of pure, unadulterated rage. The moment Elias settled onto the simple wooden stool, a silent, unmoving figure just beyond the reach of tooth and claw, Kaido launched himself at the bars. The impact of his thin body against the steel sent a shudder through the concrete floor. A horrifying, guttural roar tore from his throat, a sound that was equal parts threat and raw, exposed pain. He paced the length of the small enclosure with a frantic, desperate energy, a prisoner not just of the steel bars, but of a storm raging within his own mind. His green eyes, wide with panic and fury, were locked on Elias. He was a threat, a human, a source of pain. The very sight of him was an agony, a reminder of the snare, the capture, the helplessness. Elias did not flinch. He did not speak. He did not even look directly at Kaido. His gaze was soft, directed at the ground a few feet in front of him. He simply sat, his hands resting loosely on his knees, his posture a study in non-aggression. He was a rock in Kaido's raging sea, a fixed, calm point in a world of terrifying chaos. For hours he sat there. The sun climbed high into the sky, beating down on the concrete yard, and Elias remained. Kaido's frenzied pacing continued, his snarls growing hoarse, his energy beginning to wane, but his terror did not. Every rustle of Elias's clothing, every slight shift in his weight, sent a fresh jolt of panic through the leopard. The other keepers gave them a wide berth, shaking their heads with a mixture of pity and disbelief. Dr. Eris watched from his office window through binoculars, a deep frown etched on his face. He saw the danger. He saw the futility. He saw a good man pouring his soul into an empty vessel. At the end of the day, as the light began to fade, Elias stood up slowly, deliberately. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in the direction of the enclosure, and walked away without a backward glance. The moment he was gone, Kaido collapsed into a trembling heap in the far corner of his cage, utterly exhausted, his body vibrating with the aftershocks of his own terror. The next day, Elias returned, and the day after that, and the day after that. It became a ritual, as fixed and reliable as the rising of the sun. He would arrive in the cool of the morning, place his stool in the exact same spot, and sit. 4 hours. In silence. A week passed. Kaido's initial explosive fury began to burn itself out, replaced by a sullen, simmering hostility. He no longer threw himself at the bars, but he paced relentlessly, a low, menacing growl, a constant rumble in his chest. He watched Elias with a burning, hateful intensity. He was still waiting for the trick, the sudden move, the betrayal. He was certain it would come. Elias never wavered. He was the epitome of patience, a living testament to the power of presence. He was simply there, unwavering, unthreatening, constant. After 2 weeks of the silent vigil, something changed. It was not a grand cinematic shift, but a crack in the ice so small it was almost invisible. Elias arrived one morning, sat on his stool, and for the first time, Kaido did not immediately begin his frantic pacing. He remained in his corner, his head low, and watched. The growl was still there, a subterranean tremor of fear, but the overt aggression had receded, replaced by a sliver of something else, a wary, exhausted curiosity. Who was this strange, quiet human who did nothing, who demanded nothing, who simply was? Elias sensed the shift. The air was still thick with tension, but it was a different kind of tension. It was the tension of a question, not an answer. That day, he decided to speak. He didn't raise his voice. He murmured, his tone a low, soothing current of sound that was meant to be felt as much as heard. He didn't speak words of command or instruction. He told Kaido about his day. He described the way the light was hitting the leaves on a distant baobab tree. He spoke of the other animals, of the gentle eland and the mischievous monkeys. He spoke of nothing and everything, his voice a steady, rhythmic hum that asked for no reply. Kaido's ears, which had been pinned back in aggression, swiveled slightly, catching the sound. He tilted his head, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. This was not the language of his captors. This was something else entirely. The next day, Elias brought a small offering. It was a single, perfect piece of fresh meat, the kind reserved for the healthiest animals. He approached the enclosure slowly, placed the meat just inside the food slot, and then immediately retreated to his stool. He made no effort to watch Kaido eat. He didn't wait for a reaction. The gift was given freely, with no expectation. For the entire day, Kaido ignored it. He eyed the meat with suspicion, as if it were a trap, another part of the incomprehensible human game. But as dusk fell and Elias prepared to leave, a deep, gnawing hunger finally overrode the fear. With a final, wary glance at Elias's retreating back, Kaido crept forward and snatched the meat, dragging it back into the shadows of his concrete den. It was a victory. A small one, but a victory nonetheless. The ritual evolved. Every morning, Elias would arrive, place the offering of meat, and retreat to his stool to speak in low, calming tones. And every day, Kaido would wait until Elias was leaving before he would eat. A month passed in this slow, delicate dance. Dr. Eris watched, his skepticism slowly being eroded by a grudging admiration. "I don't understand it," he admitted to one of the keepers. "The animal is calmer. His vitals are improving. He's still a wild, dangerous leopard, but he's not actively trying to die anymore." The true testament to the slow burn of trust came with the introduction of a new object. Elias took off one of his old, worn leatherwork gloves, a thing that smelled of sweat, earth, and unwavering calm. He placed it on the ground near the fence, just outside Kaido's reach. He did this every day, leaving it in the same spot, a tangible symbol of his presence. At first, Kaido would snarl at it. Then, he would ignore it. Then, one afternoon, after weeks of this ritual, Elias watched, holding his breath, as Kaido approached the fence. The leopard lay down, his body aligned with the glove, separated by the cold steel mesh. He didn't touch the fence. He didn't make a sound. He simply lay there, his nose pointed toward the scent of the man who refused to give up on him, and for the first time since his capture, he closed his eyes in the presence of a human. He was not asleep. He was resting. He was, in his own way, accepting. The fragile peace that had been so painstakingly built was about to be shattered. The snare wound on Kaido's leg, which had been healing on the surface, had been hiding a deeper, more insidious secret. A deep bone infection had taken hold, a silent, deadly poison working its way through his system. Dr. Eris's examination confirmed his worst fears. The infection was aggressive. Without immediate and invasive surgery to clean out the bone, Kaido would lose the leg, and likely his life. The news fell like a stone in the quiet sanctuary. The procedure would mean full sedation. It would mean being handled, prodded, and cut by the very creatures he was just beginning to believe might not be monsters. It was a violation that could undo months of progress in a single, terrifying afternoon. "It will destroy him, Elias," Eris said, his face grim. "The terror of it will send him right back to day one. Worse even, he'll see it as the ultimate betrayal. All your work, it will be for nothing." Elias felt a cold dread creep into his heart, but his voice was steady when he replied, "We have no choice. But I'm not leaving his side." The day of the surgery was thick with a palpable tension. The process of sedating Kaido was heartbreaking. As the keepers approached with the dart gun, the familiar panic flared in his eyes. He looked wildly around, his gaze finally locking on Elias, who stood just beyond the fence. It was a look of profound, questioning confusion. You are part of this too?" The unspoken question hung in the air, a devastating accusation. Elias could only watch, his own heart breaking, as the dart found its mark and Kaido's powerful body finally slumped to the ground. The surgery was a tense, meticulous affair. Dr. Eris worked with focused precision, cleaning the infected bone, his brow furrowed in concentration. The entire time, Elias stood in the corner of the sterile operating room, a silent, sentinel presence. He never took his eyes off Kaido's still form. When the surgery was over, Kaido was moved to a small, quiet recovery room. He was laid out on a soft bed of blankets, and for dripping fluids into his vein. The protocol was clear. The animal was to be left completely alone to wake up, to minimize stress. "Elias, you need to leave now," Eris said, his voice firm but sympathetic. "When he starts to wake, he'll be disoriented, terrified, and in pain. He will lash out at anything that moves. It's the most dangerous time." Elias looked at Eris, and in his eyes was a calm, unshakable resolve. "No," he said softly. "This is the most important time. He can't wake up alone. Not after this." Eris argued, he pleaded, he spoke of protocol and safety, but he could see it was useless. There was a conviction in Elias that went beyond reason. Reluctantly he agreed, but only on the condition that he and another keeper remained just outside the door, ready to intervene. The wait was agonizing. An hour passed. Then another. Then Kaido's ear twitched. A low, guttural moan rumbled in his chest. His eyes flickered open, unfocused and clouded with the remnants of the anesthetic. He was weak, disoriented, and utterly vulnerable. His gaze drifted around the unfamiliar white room, and then it found him. Elias. Elias, who was not standing, but sitting on the floor a few feet away, making himself small, unthreatening. Kaido's body tensed. A weak, pained snarl formed on his lips. This was it. The moment of betrayal confirmed. But Elias did not move away. He did something that defied all logic, all training, all instinct for self-preservation. He slowly, deliberately, lay down on the floor, stretching out on his side, his head propped on his arm, placing himself at the same level as the waking predator. He did not speak. He just watched, his expression one of infinite, heartbreaking empathy. He was not a threat. He was a companion in suffering. Time seemed to stop. Kaido watched him, his mind a fog of pain and confusion. The snarl died in his throat, He saw not a captor, but the quiet man from a stool. The man with the soft voice. The man whose scent he had come to associate with a strange, unfamiliar feeling of calm. Slowly, with an effort that seemed to cost him everything, Kaido lifted his massive head. He looked at Elias. And in that moment, something shifted. A conscious choice was made in the depths of that wild, traumatized heart. He chose not to fight. He chose to trust. Elias, sensing the shift, began to move. He moved with the slowness of a glacier, every motion telegraphed, every breath calm and even. He crawled forward, inch by agonizing inch, until he was beside the gray cat. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and gently, so gently, he laid it on Kaido's flank. Kaido flinched, a tremor running through his whole body. But he did not pull away. He did not snarl. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, a release of tension that seemed to carry with it months of pent-up fear. Elias moved his hand up to Kaido's powerful neck, stroking the coarse fur, and then he did what the title of this story has promised. He carefully slid his arm under Kaido's head, cradling the magnificent, heavy skull in his lap. He held him. He held the broken, terrified leopard that nobody wanted. And Kaido, the ghost of the scrubland, the phantom of case 734, leaned into the touch. He leaned into the first moment of gentle, unconditional contact he had ever known. From outside the door, Dr. Eris watched through the small glass window, his face a mask of utter, dumbfounded astonishment. He was witnessing the impossible. He was witnessing a miracle. The miracle in the recovery room was not an ending, but a new, fragile beginning. The bond forged in that moment of shared vulnerability was as delicate as a spider's thread, and it was about to be tested by a force far greater than them both. For a week, the progress was astonishing. Kaido, recovering from his surgery, allowed Elias to be close. He allowed him to clean the wound, to bring him food and water by hand, to sit with him for hours inside the recovery room. The deep, guttural growl of terror was replaced by a soft, rumbling chuff, a sound of contentment that no one at the sanctuary had ever dreamed they would hear from him. It was a time of quiet reverence. But the sky, which had been a placid blue, began to bruise with a deep, ominous purple. A storm was coming. Not just a rainstorm, but a violent tropical tempest, the kind that rips trees from the earth and turns the world into a roaring chaos of wind and water. As the first rumbles of thunder echoed in the distance, a change came over Kaido. A deep, primal terror, older and more visceral than his fear of humans, began to stir. His ears flattened. His body went rigid. The calm, trusting light in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by the wild, panicked glare of a trapped animal. The storm hit the sanctuary with the force of a physical blow. The wind howled like a banshee, and the rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. Thunder cracked directly overhead, a sound like the sky splitting apart, and lightning bleached the world in stark, terrifying flashes. For Kaido, it was the sound of the snare tightening. It was the crack of the poacher's gun. It was the roar of the truck that had stolen him from his world. All the progress, all the patient trust building, was annihilated in an instant. His trauma, which had been sleeping, awoke with a vengeance. He flew into a blind panic, throwing himself around the small recovery room, crashing into walls, his surgical wound tearing open. He was no longer the calm patient. He was once again the terrified monster from day one. The staff, including Elias, managed to herd him back into his old, secure concrete enclosure just as the storm's fury peaked. The door slammed shut, and Kaido was alone again in his concrete box, but this time, the prison was a maelstrom of noise and terrifying light. He was lost. He reverted completely. He snarled at the sight of Elias, his eyes burning with a renewed and terrible hatred. He refused food. He cowered in the corner, trembling uncontrollably, a creature utterly consumed by his own demons. The setback was devastating. For Elias, it was a profound and personal grief. Had it all been an illusion? A temporary truce born of weakness and medication? Dr. Eris, his face etched with a weary sadness, put a hand on Elias's shoulder. "I'm sorry, my friend," he said, his voice heavy. We hoped. But you can't tame the storm inside an animal like that. You can't reason with that kind of primal fear. We've lost him again. The words hung in the air, a grim epitaph for a bond that had seemed so miraculous. The storm raged outside, and inside the heart of the sanctuary, it felt as though all hope was being washed away with the rain. It seemed the skeptics had been right all along. The leopard was a lost cause, his spirit too shattered, his wounds too deep. The miracle was over. As the storm raged, Elias felt a despair as wild and tumultuous as the weather. Every crash of thunder felt like a judgment. Every flash of lightning a confirmation of his failure. He saw Kaido's eyes in his mind, the look of terror and betrayal, and it was a wound in his own soul. He could have listened to Eris. He could have retreated, accepted the grim reality that some things, once broken, could never be truly mended. He could have walked away. But as he stood there, soaked to the bone, watching the concrete enclosure that held the terrified leopard, he remembered the feeling of Kaido's heavy head in his lap. He remembered the shuddering sigh of release. That had not been an illusion. That had been real. That trust, however fragile, had been earned, and he would not abandon it now. He would not let Kaido believe that he, too, was just another fair-weather friend. Another promise broken by the first sign of trouble. So, Elias did the only thing he knew how to do. He went back to the beginning. He found his old wooden stool, carried it through the driving rain, and placed it in its familiar spot outside Kaido's enclosure. The wind tore at his clothes, and the rain streamed down his face, but he sat. He resumed his vigil. He would not leave Kaido to face this storm alone. Inside the enclosure, Kaido was lost in a nightmare. The noise was a physical assault. He was back in the snare, the world ending around him. But through the roaring chaos, a single, constant point of familiarity registered in his terrified mind. The man, the quiet man, was here. He was not running. He was not hiding. He was sitting in the heart of the storm itself. Kaido watched him, a sliver of confusion piercing through the thick fog of his panic. Why? Why would he stay? For hours, Elias sat, a silent, unmoving statue in the deluge. He didn't speak. The storm was too loud for whispers. He just offered his presence, a steadfast anchor in the swirling vortex of fear. The storm raged all through the night. It was a long, dark, terrible night for both man and beast. But as the first gray, watery light of dawn began to break, the storm's fury began to subside. The wind softened to a mournful sigh, the thunder retreated into a distant grumble, and the rain eased to a gentle patter. A profound, exhausted silence settled over the sanctuary. Elias was still there, shivering, drenched, but unwavering. And inside the enclosure, Kaido was also still. He was no longer cowering. He was standing, his body tense, watching the man on the stool. The terror had passed, leaving behind a raw, trembling vulnerability. And in that quiet, rain-washed dawn, Kaido made another choice. It was a choice even more profound than the one he had made in the recovery room. That first choice had been born of weakness and surrender. This one was born of a dawning understanding. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. He walked slowly, deliberately, to the front of the enclosure, to the steel mesh that separated him from Elias. He stopped, his face just inches from the fence. Elias watched, his heart in his throat. He slowly raised a hand, his fingers numb with cold, and pressed it against the cold, wet steel. Kaido looked at the hand. He looked at Elias's tired, rain-streaked face. And then, with a grace that was breathtaking, he leaned forward and pressed his own head firmly against the fence, right where Elias's hand rested. He held it there, pushing into the touch, into the connection. It was not a request for food. It was not a sign of submission. It was a conscious act of seeking comfort. He had faced his deepest fear, and on the other side of it, he had chosen not to retreat into the darkness, but to reach for the light. He chose trust, not a fragile, conditional trust, but a deep, resonant bond forged in the heart of the storm, stronger and more profound than ever before. The crisis had not broken them. It had solidified them. The morning after the storm marked the true beginning of Kaido's new life. The bond, now tested by fear and fire, was no longer a fragile thread, but an unbreakable cable. The change was palpable to everyone at the sanctuary. Kaido was moved from the stark quarantine block to a sprawling naturalistic enclosure, a verdant slice of savanna carved out of the sanctuary grounds, complete with trees to climb, rocks to sunbathe on, and a deep pool of cool water. It was a kingdom, and Kaido, now sleek and powerful, ruled it with a quiet, confident grace. His physical transformation was astounding. His coat was a lustrous tapestry of gold and black. His muscles rippled beneath his skin, and the haunted, fearful look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a calm, intelligent light. But the most incredible transformation was in his relationship with Elias. The trust between them was now absolute, a silent, symbiotic understanding that baffled and awed all who witnessed it. Under the watchful and now reverent eye of Dr. Eris, Elias could enter the enclosure. There were always safety protocols in place. Eris was a pragmatist, after all, but they often seemed superfluous. Kaido would greet Elias not with aggression, but with a low, happy chuff, rubbing his massive head against Elias's legs like a common house cat. He would allow Elias to inspect his healed leg, to check his teeth, to sit beside him in the shade of an acacia tree. Their time together was a portrait of interspecies harmony, a quiet testament to a love that defied all conventional wisdom. The moment of true conversion for the rational skeptic, Dr. Eris, came on a hot, lazy afternoon. He had accompanied Elias to the enclosure, ostensibly to check on Kaido's progress, but really, he was there to simply watch. He still couldn't fully comprehend what he was seeing. Elias was sitting on a large, flat rock, and Kaido was lying nearby, lazily grooming a paw. After a few minutes, Kaido stood up, walked over to a small, shaded bush, and returned with something in his mouth. He padded softly over to Elias, and with an impossible gentleness, he dropped the object at his feet. It was the old, worn leatherwork glove, the one Elias had left by his cage for all those weeks. It was weathered and battered from being kept in the enclosure, but it was intact. Kaido looked at Elias, then nudged the glove with his nose, a clear and unmistakable gesture. It was a gift, a thank you, a symbol of their entire journey, from the silent vigil to this moment of peaceful communion. Dr. Eris stood frozen, his clinical detachment dissolving into pure, unadulterated awe. He had seen countless animal behaviors, studied terabytes of data on predator instincts, but he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't instinct. This wasn't conditioning. This was something else. This was gratitude. This was a connection that science had no words for. Later that day, Eris found Elias by the staff quarters. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly, a small, disbelieving smile on his face. "I was wrong," Eris said, his voice thick with emotion. "Completely, utterly wrong. I saw a broken animal, a statistic. You saw a soul. What you have done here, Elias, it's not in any textbook. It's not something that can be taught. It's a miracle. You didn't just save his life. You gave him back his spirit." The validation from the man of science was profound. It was a recognition that what had transpired between man and leopard had transcended the boundaries of biology and entered the realm of the sacred. The story of Elias and Kaido became a quiet legend at the sanctuary, a source of hope and wonder for the weary staff, a reminder of why they did what they did. The bond had deepened beyond trainer and animal. It was a friendship, pure and simple, a daily conversation spoken in a language of silent glances, gentle nudges, and shared stillness. Kaido's transformation was now complete. He was no longer the shattered ghost they had dragged from the scrubland. He was a magnificent, living embodiment of resilience. To see him was to witness a masterpiece of nature reborn. His movements were liquid grace, a ripple of power and elegance as he navigated his kingdom. When he climbed the thick branches of the marula tree in his enclosure, he was not a captive animal. He was a king surveying his domain. When he drank from the pool, his reflection showed not a victim, but a survivor, his green eyes holding the wisdom of his ordeal, but none of the terror. He was whole. The physical scars on his leg had faded to pale, silvery lines, but the invisible scars on his spirit seemed to have vanished entirely, healed by an alchemy of patience and love. His relationship with Elias was the heart of his new reality. It was a daily ritual of quiet companionship. Elias would enter the enclosure and simply be with him. Sometimes they would walk the perimeter together, Kaido padding silently beside him. Other times Elias would sit and read, and Kaido would nap nearby, one protective eye always half open, a silent guardian to the man who had guarded him. The narrative of their connection began to take on a deeper, more philosophical meaning for those who watched. It was a living parable. It spoke of the profound untapped capacity for healing that exists in all creatures. It was a story that challenged the very notion of what it means to be wild or broken. Kaido, the untamable predator, had learned to love and trust with a depth that was profoundly moving. He had not been domesticated. He had been redeemed. The narrator reflects on this profound truth, guiding the viewer to see beyond the surface story of an animal rescue. This was not just about saving a leopard. It was about witnessing a communication that transcended the barrier of species, a conversation of the soul. How does a man teach a leopard to trust again? Not with words, not with dominance, but by offering his own vulnerability as a bridge. How does a leopard, an animal of instinct and solitude, learn to express gratitude? Not with language, but with the offering of a worn leather glove, a symbol so potent it left the man of science speechless. Their bond was a silent poem, written in gestures and glances. It was in the slow blink Kaido would give Elias from across the enclosure, a sign of ultimate trust in the feline world. It was in the way Elias would murmur to Kaido, his voice a low thrum of affection that the leopard would answer with a soft, breathy chuff. They had created their own language, a lexicon of love built one patient day at a time. The story of Kaido was no longer a tragedy. It was a testament to the fact that no soul is truly a lost cause, a testament to the idea that the most profound healing comes not from medicine or surgery, but from the simple, unwavering presence of another who refuses to see you as broken and instead chooses to see you as whole. The sun sets on the sanctuary, painting the African sky in hues of fire and gold. In his magnificent enclosure, Kaido lies stretched out on a high, sun-warmed rock, the picture of tranquility and power. He is not the same creature that was found tangled in a wire, waiting for death. He is a symbol of transcendence, a living monument to the transformative power of a single, patient connection. From a respectful distance, Elias watches him, a soft smile on his face. The bond between them is no longer a thing that needs to be demonstrated. It is a quiet, abiding truth, an invisible, unbreakable thread that stretches between them, woven from shared storms and silent dawns. As we look upon this scene of profound peace, the narrative transcends the specific story of one man and one leopard and touches upon a universal, timeless truth. Who truly saved whom? Yes, Elias saved Kaido from a snare, from starvation, from the sterile finality of a veterinarian's needle. He gave him back his life. But in return, what did Kaido give to Elias? And to all who witnessed their journey? He gave them a gift of immense value. He taught them the true meaning of patience, a patience that is not a passive waiting, but an active, hopeful presence. He reminded them that communication is not limited to words, and that the most important conversations are often held in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. He showed them that trust is not a commodity to be demanded, but a sacred gift to be earned, moment by precious moment. In a world that often feels fractured and fearful, Kaido's journey from a vessel of terror to a beacon of trust is a powerful lesson for humanity. He showed that beneath the shield of aggression, fear, and pain, there often lies a spirit yearning for connection, waiting for a hand that will not flinch, a heart that will not judge. The story of Elias and Kaido is not just an animal redemption arc. It is a human redemption arc. It redeems our hope. It redeems our belief in the power of empathy. It forces us to look at the broken things of the world, be they animals or people, and to ask ourselves if we have the courage and patience to see the soul waiting within. The final shot is of Kaido, his golden form bathed in the last light of day. He turns his head, and his luminous green eyes meet ours, just for a moment. There is no fear. There is no hatred. There is only a deep, abiding calm, the peace of a soul that has found its safe harbor. And in that look, we understand. The greatest miracles are not loud and explosive. They are quiet. They are slow. They are the patient, unwavering love of one being for another, a love that has the power to mend the world, one shattered spirit at a time.